Victoria Sinclair didn't wait until Charlotte was gone to start talking. She did it while Charlotte was still standing there. "Who invited the drowned cat?" Victoria said it loud enough, not loud enough for the whole room, just loud enough for the circle of people around her. She said it with a smile on her face, the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes, the kind you learn to wear when you've spent years performing warmth you don't actually feel. She looked Charlotte up and down once, the wet hem, the borrowed dress, the shoes leaving small dark prints on the marble floor, and then looked away, as if the sight wasn't even worth the rest of her attention. The people around her laughed. Not loud, just enough. Charlotte heard it. She was close enough to hear it. She stood at the edge of that glittering room with rain still cold on the back of her neck, and she heard every word, and she felt her face go hot, and then go very still. She didn't leave. That's the thing about Charlotte Hayes. She didn't leave. If this story happened to you, if you walked into a room full of senators and billionaires in a borrowed dress and soaked shoes, and the most powerful woman in the room made sure everyone heard her laugh at you, what would you do? This is the story of what Charlotte did and why it changed everything. If you're watching right now, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because the stories coming to this channel are the kind you don't want to miss in the middle. The rain had been falling since noon. By the time Charlotte Hayes reached the address on the invitation card, her umbrella had turned itself inside out twice. Her left shoe had developed a slow leak, and the emerald green dress she'd borrowed from her coworker Dana was damp along the hem in a way that wasn't going to dry before she walked into that building. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Harrington Grand Hotel and looked up at the lit windows on the 14th floor and thought very seriously about going home. She had $32 in her wallet. She had a Metro card with enough for the ride back to her apartment in Dorchester. She had a library card and a debit card with a balance she knew without checking. She did not have anything that belonged in a room full of people who gave away $100,000 at charity auctions the way other people tipped at dinner. But Dana had begged her. Dana, who had been planning to attend the Ashford Literacy Foundation Gala for 3 months, had woken up that morning with a fever of 102 and had called Charlotte at 4 in the afternoon, voice wrecked, and said, "Please, you're the only one I trust to represent the library right. Please just go. You don't have to stay long, just go and say we were there." So here Charlotte was, standing in the rain, saying she was there. She pushed through the revolving door. The lobby was the kind of room that made you feel the specific, quiet shame of your own clothing. Everything was marble and amber light, and the faint smell of something expensive. A coat check attendant took one look at Charlotte's umbrella, the bent, inside-out disaster of it, and very carefully did not react. The elevator opened onto the 14th floor, and the noise hit her first. Not loud noise, controlled noise. The particular sound of several hundred wealthy people performing enjoyment. Crystal glasses and low laughter and a string quartet playing something she almost recognized. Charlotte was 47 minutes late. She knew because she checked her phone in the elevator, and her phone showed 8:47, and the invitation had said 8 o'clock, and she'd been on the subway when the rain started, and the red line had stalled between stations for 22 minutes, while an automated voice apologized in a tone that suggested it felt nothing about the matter. The ballroom was enormous and golden and full. She took one step inside and stopped, just for a second, just long enough to understand that she had absolutely no idea what she was supposed to do next. Dana's note had said, "Find the registration table, pick up your badge, find the library's table, sit down." Simple. Except the registration table was on the far side of the room, and between Charlotte and the far side of the room was approximately 400 people in formal wear that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and she was wearing wet shoes and a borrowed dress, and she'd already been noticed. She could feel it, the way you feel eyes without seeing them. She started walking. She kept her chin up. She didn't know she was doing it. It was just the thing her body had learned to do in moments when she felt like disappearing. Chin up, shoulders back, walk like you meant to arrive exactly this way, 47 minutes late and damp. Because you are a professional and you are here on behalf of 43 children who use the Kenmore Branch Library 4 days a week. And they deserve someone who shows up for them. She was halfway across the room when she heard it, Victoria Sinclair's voice. Charlotte didn't know her name yet. She didn't know anything about her yet. She only saw a woman who looked like she had been assembled specifically to make other women feel inadequate. Tall, dark-haired, wearing something black and architectural, standing inside a circle of people whose attention she was clearly accustomed to having. "Who invited the drowned cat?" said with a smile. Said just loud enough. Said in that specific register that told you the speaker had practice at this, that this was not an accident or a moment of cruelty she'd regret later, but a precision instrument she deployed when she wanted to establish something. The small laugh that moved through the circle. Charlotte felt it land in her chest like something physical. Her face went hot, then went still. She kept walking. Registration table, badge, library table. Sit down. She found the table. She picked up her badge. It said Charlotte Hayes, Kenmore Branch Library, Boston, and she clipped it to the dress at a place that covered the small, dark water stain near the neckline. And she found table 24 and sat down. There were 4 other people at table 24. She introduced herself. They introduced themselves. 2 of them were from a nonprofit in Somerville. One was a teacher from Roxbury. One was a foundation administrator whose name Charlotte promptly forgot because her heart was still doing something unpleasant in her chest, and she was spending most of her concentration on looking like it wasn't. She picked up the auction catalog from the table because it gave her something to hold. She opened it. She turned pages without seeing them for a few seconds. Then a heading caught her eye, and she stopped turning. Lot 14. First edition. The Lighthouse Keeper's Son, Eleanor Marsh, 1951. Illustrated. Original binding, near fine condition. She read it again. Then she looked up around the room until she found the display table near the far wall where the auction items were arranged under soft lights. She could see it from here. The book was in a glass case, open to an illustration she recognized. The boy on the dock, the lantern, the storm coming over the water. And even from this distance, from across a room full of senators and billionaires, she felt something she hadn't felt since she was 8 years old, sitting in a library that smelled like must and old paper and possibility. That book was the reason she'd become a librarian. Not because someone had told her to, not because of some career aptitude test or practical consideration. Because when she was 8, a librarian named Mrs. Ola Wall had pressed it into her hands and said, "This one is for keepers," and Charlotte had gone home and read it twice before dinner and cried at the ending in the best possible way, the way that meant something had opened up in her chest and she was different afterward. The starting bid was listed in the catalog as $45,000. She put the catalog down. She reached for her water glass and drank some water and gave herself a firm internal talking to about realistic expectations and the actual purpose of this evening, which was to represent the library with dignity, not to stand in front of a priceless book and want things she couldn't afford. She was in the middle of this internal talking to when someone sat down in the empty chair to her left. She didn't look up right away. She assumed it was another foundation administrator. "That bad?" the man said. She looked up then. He was looking at the auction catalog, which was still open in her hands to Lot 14, and she realized her expression had probably been less composed than she intended. "Sorry," she said. "You've been staring at that page for about 3 minutes," he said. "You either love whatever's on it, or you're trying to set it on fire with your mind." She laughed before she could decide whether to. It was the specificity of it, or you're trying to set it on fire, that got her. "Lot 14, she said, and turned the catalog toward him. The Lighthouse Keeper's Son, First Edition. He looked at it. He had a particular kind of stillness about him that she noticed without being able to name immediately. Not the stillness of someone bored or distracted, the stillness of someone who was doing a great deal of thinking that didn't show on his face. "Childhood favorite?" he said. "Career defining," she said. Though I realize that probably sounds like an overstatement about a children's book. Does it? Usually when I say that to people, they nod in a way that means they think it's sweet. He didn't nod. He considered it seriously, which was unexpected. "What does it define?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. He was asking like he actually wanted the answer, not like he was filling time between conversations he actually wanted to have. She'd gotten good at telling the difference. "I'm a children's librarian," she said. "Kenmore Branch, Boston. We have about 40 kids who come in most weeks. Some of them don't have books at home. Some of them have books at home, but no one who reads to them. I read to them. I've been doing it for 6 years. She paused. That book is why I know what that matters. Because Mrs. Olawale gave it to me when I was 8, and it was the first time I understood that a story could stay with you, really stay, past the last page. She closed the catalog. That's what it defined. The man was quiet for a moment. Charlotte Hayes, she said, because she realized she'd given him a small speech without introducing herself, and she extended her hand. Damien, he said, and shook it. He didn't give a last name. She didn't think anything of it. People at events like this sometimes led with first names and followed with titles and company affiliations later. She assumed she'd get the business card version eventually. He asked about the library. Not in the polite question at a charity event way, but in the actually paying attention way, asking specifics, listening to her answers, occasionally asking the follow-up that told her he'd actually processed what she'd said rather than waiting for his next turn to talk. She found herself telling him about the funding cuts. Not to complain, she tried to be careful about that, about the line between informing and whining, but because he'd asked directly why the library had lost its full-time after-school program, and the answer was budget, city budget cuts, a line item that got trimmed 2 years ago and hadn't been restored. The kids still come, she said. That's the thing. The kids still show up. We just have less to offer them. He was looking at her in a way that she couldn't quite categorize. You're not here to network, he said. It wasn't an accusation, more like an observation. My coworker got sick, Charlotte said. I'm here because someone from the library should be, and I'm the someone who was available. Something moved across his face. Not a smile exactly, something quieter. Across the room, Charlotte noticed without specifically noticing, a woman in black with dark hair looked over at their table and went very still. The auction started at 9. Charlotte stayed at her table and watched. The bidding on lot 14 started at $45,000, went to 60 in under 2 minutes, and climbed from there with the particular momentum of people for whom the number meant less than the winning. She watched the paddle in the room go up and come down and go up again, and she kept her hands folded in her lap. And she didn't bid, because of course she didn't bid. And she watched the book go for $112,000 to a paddle in the back of the room she couldn't identify. She stayed for 40 more minutes. She spoke to the people at her table. She ate a small amount of the dessert that appeared during the auction. She did not look for Damien again because that would have been a thing to do, and she wasn't trying to do a thing. She was just there to represent the library. At 10:15, she retrieved her coat from the coat check, said goodbye to no one in particular, and took the elevator down to the lobby and went back out into the rain, which had let up slightly, enough that her umbrella stayed right side in on the walk to the station. On the subway home, she thought about the book. She thought about the look on its cover, the boy on the dock. She thought about Mrs. Olawale, who had retired in 2009 and moved to Atlanta and sent the library a card every Christmas. She did not think about Damien because she had no particular reason to. She got home at 11 and changed out of Dana's dress and hung it carefully to dry and went to bed. The next morning, a package arrived at the Kenmore Branch Library. It came by private courier, not postal service. The courier asked for Charlotte Hayes specifically. One of the library aides came to find her where she was setting up the reading corner for the Tuesday story hour. The package was a box, a carefully made archival box of the kind used for rare materials. Charlotte opened it. Inside, nested in acid-free tissue paper, was a first edition copy of The Lighthouse Keeper's Son by Eleanor Marsh. Original binding. Near fine condition. There was no note, there was no return address. There was only the book, which Charlotte lifted out of the box with both hands and held for a moment longer than was professionally appropriate, and then set down on the table in front of her and stood back and looked at. She understood immediately. Lot 14. The paddle in the back of the room she couldn't identify. She stood there for almost a full minute. Then she started making phone calls. It took her the rest of that morning and part of the afternoon and a conversation with the Foundation's public communications office, who were professionally pleasant and professionally evasive, before she had an address. Blackwood Tower. 43 floors of glass and steel in the back bay. She went the next morning. She brought the book. She told herself on the subway over that she was doing the right thing. You didn't accept a gift worth $112,000 from a stranger. You didn't let a man you'd spoken to for 30 minutes at a charity event, a man who hadn't even given you his last name, Spend six figures on something for your library without having a conversation about it. You returned it. Politely. With gratitude. But you returned it. The lobby of Blackwood Tower was different from the hotel lobby. The hotel lobby had been designed to impress people who had money. This lobby was designed to impress people who already knew they had power. There was a difference, and Charlotte felt it the moment the glass doors closed behind her. The receptionist at the front desk looked at her, not unkindly, but with an assessment so practiced it had become invisible. "Charlotte Hayes," Charlotte said. "I'm here to return something to—" She paused. She realized she didn't know his last name. "To Damien. From the Ashford Gala. He purchased something that was sent to the Kenmore Branch Library, and I need to speak with him." The receptionist's expression shifted in a way Charlotte couldn't entirely read. "Can you hold for a moment, Ms. Hayes?" She held. She held for approximately 4 minutes, standing in that lobby with an archival box under her arm, reading a wall of framed photographs she could see from where she stood. Foundation events, ribbon cuttings, award ceremonies. And then she saw it. One photograph. A press event of some kind. A ribbon cutting for a new building. Several people in suits. And in the center, wearing the same particular stillness she'd noticed across a table at a charity auction, the man she'd known as Damien. The nameplate on the building behind him read Blackwood Industries. She read the caption beneath the photograph. Damien Blackwood, founder and CEO, Blackwood Industries and the Ashford Literacy Foundation, at the opening of the Blackwood Technology Center, November 2021. She stood there, looking at that caption for a long moment. Then she looked back at the receptionist, who was watching her carefully. "Damien Blackwood," Charlotte said. She said it the way you say something when you are recalibrating in real time. "I need to speak with Damien Blackwood." "He's expecting you," the receptionist said. 41st floor. Charlotte looked down at the box under her arm, at the book inside it, at the elevator doors across the lobby. She walked toward them. And on the 41st floor, the door opened onto a view of Boston that she had never seen from this angle. And the man from the Gala was standing at the window, and he turned when she came in, and he looked exactly as he had looked at the table. That stillness, that quality of attention. Except that now she knew the name on the building, and she knew the name in the caption, and she understood that she had spent 30 minutes talking about her 43 library kids and their funding cuts to one of the most powerful men in America, and he had listened like it mattered. She set the box on the table beside the door. "You should have told me who you were," she said. "You didn't ask," he said. "That's not—" She stopped. "That's technically true and also not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." She put her hand on top of the box. "I can't accept this. The library can't accept this. $112,000 from someone I spoke to for 30 minutes at an event. That's not a donation. That's a... I don't even know what that is." "It's a book," he said. "It's not just a book, and you know that." He was quiet. "Why?" she said. "Why that book? Why send it with no note, no return address? What is it that you actually want here?" He looked at her for a long moment, like he was deciding something. "There's a proposal," he said finally, "from the foundation, if you'll hear it." She crossed her arms. "I'm listening," she said. And that was the beginning. Not of a fairy tale, not of something smooth and golden and easy, but of something. Down on the 37th floor, in an office that smelled like expensive paper and careful ambition, Victoria Sinclair stood at her window looking out at the same Boston skyline, turning her phone over in her hand, reading the name she'd just searched. Charlotte Hayes, Kenmore Branch Library, Boston. She put the phone in her pocket. She had work to do. The proposal was 3 pages long. Damien slid it across the conference table without ceremony. No folder, no presentation, just 3 sheets of paper with the Ashford Foundation letterhead and a summary of terms that Charlotte read standing up because she hadn't sat down yet and she wasn't sure she was going to. She read it twice. The foundation would take legal custody of the first edition. Insured, climate-controlled, professionally preserved. It would be housed permanently at the Kenmore Branch Library in a custom display case built to archival standards. The library retained full access for public viewing. The foundation covered all preservation costs in perpetuity. The only condition, Charlotte Hayes would organize and host a children's reading event at the library within 60 days, to be attended by Foundation representatives and documented for the Foundation's annual report. She put the papers down. "You want a photo op," she said. "The Foundation wants documentation of community engagement." "That's the same thing in different words." He didn't flinch. "Yes, it is." She appreciated that he didn't try to dress it up. She appreciated it, and it also didn't change anything. "The children at my library," she said carefully, "are not props. They're not background for a press release. They're actual kids with actual lives, and some of them have situations at home that make them—" She stopped, chose her words. "They're not for display." No event would require any child to be identified or photographed without explicit parental consent obtained well in advance. That's the legal minimum. I know. I'm talking about something different from the legal minimum. He was quiet. He was watching her with that quality of attention she was starting to find both useful and unnerving. The kind that didn't rush her, didn't fill the silence, just waited. "What I'm talking about," Charlotte said, "is that if there are cameras and Foundation executives and people in suits coming into my library, the kids feel it. They feel the room change. They feel like they're being watched. And when you feel watched, you stop being yourself. And when you stop being yourself, you stop actually engaging with the book. And the whole point—" She put her hand flat on the papers. "The whole point is the book, the story. That's what Mrs. Olawale understood. You don't make the kid perform the magic. You just put the book in their hands and get out of the way." Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatic, small. The way a door moves slightly before it opens. "What would you need," he said, "to make it work the way you want it to work?" She looked at him. "You'd change the terms?" "I'm asking what you'd need." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. They talked for another hour. His assistant brought coffee that Charlotte drank without tasting. Outside the 41st floor windows, the city did its city things, traffic and clouds and the distant glint of the harbor. And inside the room, two people who had absolutely no logical reason to trust each other worked out the details of something that was probably, Charlotte thought at least twice, a terrible idea. By the time she left, she had a revised version of the terms with her handwritten notes in the margins. No Foundation staff present during the event itself. No press. No photography of the children. One photograph of the display case alone, pre-event, for documentation purposes. She walked out of Blackwood Tower into the October air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she took out her phone and called Dana. "How are you feeling?" "Like something the cat rejected," Dana said. "How was the gala?" "Fine," Charlotte said. "I need to tell you something." She told her. All of it. The book, the lobby photograph, the 41st floor meeting. By the time she finished, there was a silence on the other end of the line that had its own specific quality. "Charlotte," Dana said, "I know." "Damian Blackwood." "I know." "Do you know who Damian Blackwood is? Like, do you actually—" "He's the CEO of Blackwood Industries and the founder of the Ashford Foundation." "I know." Another silence. "There are other things he's the founder of," Dana said. Her voice had gone careful in a way that Charlotte recognized. Dana was a woman who chose her words precisely when it mattered. "What does that mean?" "It means, look, I don't know anything for certain. Nobody does. That's kind of the whole thing. But there are people who say that the legitimate businesses are, that they're not the whole picture." Charlotte stood on the sidewalk outside Blackwood Tower. "What are you saying, Dana?" "I'm saying be careful," Dana said. "I'm saying know what room you're walking into before you walk into it." Charlotte looked up at the building. 43 floors. The way the light caught the glass. "I'm hosting a children's reading event," she said, "with a first edition that my kids can actually hold and read. That's what I'm doing." "Okay," Dana said. "Okay." "I trust your judgment," Dana said. Okay, be careful." Charlotte took the subway home. She sat in the orange plastic seat and held the revised terms in her lap and looked out the dark window at the tunnel wall going past and thought about what Dana hadn't quite said. She thought about it, and then she set it down in the part of her mind where she kept things she couldn't do anything about right now, and she opened her laptop when she got home and started drafting a schedule for the event. She had 43 kids who deserved to hold a piece of history. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. Except it wasn't, because 3 days later the photographs appeared. She didn't see them first. Her neighbor Marcus knocked on her door at 7:15 in the morning while she was making coffee and said, "Hey, are you okay? There's stuff online." And when she opened her phone, he was already pulling up the tab. The photographs were from the Gala. Someone with a camera and either very good timing or very deliberate intent had captured the moment she and Damien were talking at the table. His head slightly tilted toward hers, her laughing, the body language of two people in an actual conversation. Separated from context, which they were, completely separated from context, the images looked like something else entirely. The headline on the first outlet read, "Blackwood's Mystery Woman. Who is she?" The second, "Billionaire Damien Blackwood spotted with unknown companion at charity gala." The third, which was the one that made Charlotte's coffee go cold in her hand. "The woman who finally thawed America's most untouchable bachelor, and what she wants from him." She read it. She made herself read it. The article described her as a social climber. It described the dress, the borrowed rain-damp emerald green dress, as a calculated choice designed to stand out. It described her presence at the gala as strategically timed. It described the library, her actual library, as a convenient cover story. It didn't name a source. She put the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there with her hands flat on the tile and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, the way she'd learned to do when she was 23, and going through something that had briefly made her wonder if she would get through it, and she had gotten through it, and she would get through this. Her phone started ringing. The library board chair, Eleanor Goss, called at 8:30. Eleanor Goss was 71 years old and had been running library boards in various capacities since Charlotte was in elementary school, and her voice on the phone was the particular temperature of someone maintaining professionalism through an effort of will. "I assume you've seen the coverage," Eleanor said. "Yes. The board has received 3 calls this morning from community members expressing concern." "I understand. Charlotte, I need to ask you directly. Is there a personal relationship here that the board should be aware of?" Charlotte pressed her fingers against the edge of the counter. "I met Damien Blackwood at the Ashford Gala for the first time 3 days ago. We spoke for approximately 30 minutes. He subsequently made an anonymous donation of a first edition book to the library, and I went to his office to discuss the terms of a partnership agreement for the preservation and display of the book. That is the complete and accurate description of the relationship." A pause. "And the photographs?" "We were talking at a table. Someone with a camera decided to make it into something it wasn't." Another pause. Longer. "The board will need to meet," Eleanor said. "Thursday. Can you be available?" "Of course." She hung up. She went to her bedroom and got dressed. Navy cardigan, khaki pants, the flat shoes she wore when she knew it was going to be a day that required being on her feet, and she went to the library. The Tuesday story hour kids were already arriving when she got there. She hung up her coat. She went into the reading room and she rearranged the cushions into the circle formation, and she put the stack of picture books on the low table, and she sat down on the floor with 7 children between the ages of 4 and 9, and she read to them about a frog who was afraid of the rain, and she did the voices. And Marcus, the 4-year-old with the gap-toothed smile, who was not her neighbor Marcus but happened to share the name, climbed into her lap halfway through the second book without asking, the way small children do, and she let him. For 45 minutes, she was just the librarian. Then the 45 minutes ended, and she was back in the world. Her phone had 17 new notifications. She ignored all but 2. One was from Dana, who had texted, "I'm so sorry, this is garbage. You don't deserve it." The other was from a number she didn't recognize, which turned out to be a foundation email address from Damien's assistant, informing her that Mr. Blackwood was aware of the media attention and wished to speak with her at her convenience. She typed back, "Tomorrow morning, here, the library." And then, because she was Charlotte Hayes and she didn't do things halfway, she added 9 a.m. No security detail inside the building. No press. Bring the revised contract if it's been finalized. She hit send before she could think about it too long. That afternoon, at Blackwood Tower, Victoria Sinclair knocked twice on Damien's office door and entered without waiting. This was a thing she did, had always done. The knock was for form. The entry was the reality. Damien was standing at the window. He turned when she came in, and his expression was the flat, unreadable thing it became when he was controlling something. She'd known him long enough to read the edges of it. "You've seen the coverage," she said. It wasn't a question. "I've seen it. The board of the foundation is already fielding calls from donors." She set a tablet on his desk without approaching his window. "3 major institutional donors have reached out to inquire about the nature of your relationship with the woman from the Gala. Tell them there's nothing to inquire about." Damien. She said his name the way she'd been saying it for 4 years, with the specific familiarity of someone who had decided the familiarity was mutual even when it wasn't. Whoever this woman is, she's a liability. The attention alone. "She's a children's librarian," he said. "She runs a reading program for 40 kids who don't have access to books at home. I made a donation. The foundation is formalizing a preservation agreement. That's all." Victoria picked up the tablet, set it down again. "The narrative being built by these outlets isn't about a donation," she said carefully. "It's about you. About the fact that you were photographed watching her with an expression that people are characterizing as, I know what they're characterizing it as. Then you understand why this is a problem." He turned from the window. He looked at Victoria for a moment, a long moment, the kind that she had learned over 4 years did not mean nothing. "What I understand," he said, "is that a woman who had nothing to do with any of this woke up this morning to articles calling her a gold digger because she talked to me at a table. What I understand is that my name is the thing that did that to her. Not her. My name." He picked up the tablet. He set it back down. "So fix it." Victoria stared at him. "Fix it," she repeated. "Talk to the communications team. Issue a statement that makes absolutely clear that Ms. Hayes is a library professional who attended the gala on behalf of her institution and who has an arm's-length professional relationship with the foundation. Clear language. Quick release. Tonight." Victoria was quiet for a moment. And if the narrative has already moved past what a statement can correct, then we find out what it takes to correct it anyway. She left. She walked down the hall to her own office and closed the door and stood with her back against it for a moment in the quiet. She pulled out her phone. She scrolled to a contact listed only as M. She typed, "I need the full background on a Charlotte Hayes. Kenmore Branch Library, Boston. Everything public. Tonight." She put the phone in her pocket. She sat down at her desk and opened the communications draft and began writing the statement Damien had asked for. She wrote it carefully. She wrote it correctly. She filed it with the communications team at 5:15. She told herself that was all she was doing. The statement went out at 6. By 7, it had been picked up and reported on by 2 of the outlets that had run the original photographs. By 8, the framing had shifted. Slightly. Enough to notice. Charlotte saw it on her phone at 8:43, sitting on her couch with her feet under her and a cup of tea that had gone tepid, and she felt something unclench slightly in her chest. Not everything. Not most things. But slightly. She went to bed at 10. She lay in the dark and thought about Thursday's board meeting. She thought about what she was going to say to Eleanor Goss and the board, the precise, clear, factual version of events that didn't leave room for interpretation. She ran it in her head twice, editing as she went. She thought briefly about what Dana hadn't quite said. She pushed it aside. At 9 the next morning, a black car pulled up outside the Kenmore Branch Library. Charlotte watched it from the window next to the reference desk. The driver opened the back door. Damien Blackwood got out. He was wearing a coat but no tie. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the library, a modest brick building with a hand-lettered banner in the window that said, "Story Hour, Tuesdays and Thursdays." And then he walked to the door. He came in alone. Charlotte met him in the entryway. She did not extend her hand. She looked at him for a moment and then said, "Back room," and turned and led him through the stacks to the small staff room with the wobbly table and the coffee maker that worked about 60% of the time. She poured coffee. She handed him a cup. She sat across the table from him. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "Thank you," she said flatly. "That's helpful." A corner of his mouth moved. "The statement helped," she said. It wasn't enough, but it helped. The board is meeting Thursday to discuss my— She looked for the right word. Situation. I'll provide a written account of the timeline if it would help the board. A written account from you might complicate things further, actually. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. They're already questioning my judgment. Producing documentation from Damien Blackwood might— She stopped. He watched her. Tell me something, she said. Straight answer. No PR framing. All right. Is there anything about you, about the foundation, or your businesses, or anything attached to your name that I should know before I walk into that board meeting? Because if there's something and it comes out in that room and I didn't know— She met his eyes. I need to know what I'm standing in front of. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. The foundation is legitimate, he said. Everything attached to it is audited, legal, and clean. The preservation agreement is exactly what it says it is. That's not quite what I asked. He set down his coffee cup. No, he said. It isn't. Is there a but? He looked at the wobbly table for a moment. He looked like a man selecting what to carry and what to set down, and knowing the difference costs something. There are parts of my business life, he said carefully, that are not fully reflected in what you've read about me. Charlotte's hands tightened slightly on the cup. Define not fully reflected. I run things, he said, outside the legitimate structure. Things that are— He stopped. Old, inherited. Not entirely something I chose at the beginning. The coffee maker dripped. Charlotte didn't move. Are we talking about something illegal? She said. He didn't answer immediately. Damien. Yes, he said. Some of it. She put the cup down. She looked at the wall behind him, at the corkboard covered in story hour schedules and children's drawings, and a photograph of Marcus the 4-year-old holding up a book he'd read on his own for the first time, grinning like he'd split the atom. You let me come to your office, she said. Her voice was even. You let me walk in there with that book. You sat across from me and we talked about what the event would look like and what the terms would be and what would be good for the kids, and you had this whole other thing. The foundation is separate from— Don't. Her voice came out sharper than she intended, and she didn't take it back. Don't tell me it's separate. You're not two people. He was quiet. I know that, he said. She stood up. She went to the corkboard and stood with her back to him, looking at Marcus's drawing. The frog from Tuesday's story, green crayon, enormous happy eyes, rain falling in blue lines. I have a board meeting Thursday, she said, and I have to go into that room and tell those people that my professional judgment is sound. And the only way I can do that is if I actually believe it. She turned around. Right now, I'm not sure I do. He looked up at her from the table. He looked, she thought, exactly like what he'd said. Someone with an old inheritance he hadn't entirely chosen. Tired in a way that expensive clothes and careful stillness didn't quite cover. What do you want me to do? He said. I don't know yet, she said. The agreement is still on the table, she said. For now, because the book is real and the kids are real, and whatever you are, that part is real. She sat back down. She picked up her coffee. But I need you to understand something. Tell me, if anything that comes from your name, any piece of whatever it is you're not telling me fully, lands on this library, or on these kids, or on the people who work here, she held his eyes. I will not protect you. I will be completely transparent about everything I know, including this conversation. I won't lie to protect your reputation. He held her gaze. I wouldn't ask you to, he said. Good. She set the cup down. Then we understand each other. They sat for a moment in the wobbly table, 60% coffee maker silence of the staff room. Then Damien reached into his coat and took out the revised contract, finalized, with the foundation's legal stamp in the corner. He slid it across the table. Charlotte looked at it. She looked at him. She picked up a pen and signed her name at the bottom in her ordinary, slightly cramped librarian's handwriting. She slid it back. He signed his name beside hers. Neither of them said anything about what it meant. Charlotte clipped the contract to her clipboard. She stood up and said she had a story hour to set up, and Damien said he'd show himself out, and she said she'd see him at the installation of the display case in 2 weeks, and he said yes. He walked out through the stacks. At the door, he paused. He looked back at the reading room. The cushions in a circle, the low table with its stack of picture books, the photograph on the corkboard. Then he left. And 6 blocks away, in the back seat of a different car, a woman named Victoria Sinclair was reading a file on her phone. Charlotte Hayes, 32 pages, public record, social media, employment history, personal history. And she was thinking carefully about the board meeting on Thursday, and about who else might want to ask questions at that meeting, and about whether the right piece of information, shared with the right person at the right moment, might resolve a problem that Damien's statement had only temporarily quieted. She closed the file. She opened a different contact. She started to type. The library opens at 9 on Thursday mornings. Charlotte would be there by 8. The board meeting was at 10. 2 hours between arriving and walking into that room, 2 hours where she would be sorting returns and checking in picture books and making sure the story hour materials were ready, moving through the ordinary motions of the job she had spent 6 years building, not knowing that someone had already decided that Thursday was the day everything changed. Charlotte got to the library at 7:58 on Thursday morning. Not 8. Not 8:15. 7:58. Because she was the kind of person who arrived before the thing she was dreading rather than after it, on the theory that at least then she had some time to settle into her own skin before the reckoning. She unlocked the front door. She turned off the alarm. She put her coat on the hook in the staff room and started the coffee maker. The 60% one, which this morning chose to be in its cooperative 40%. And she stood at the reference desk and sorted the overnight book drop returns the way she had sorted them 6 days a week for 6 years. Picture books to the left cart, early readers to the middle, chapter books to the right. Her hands knew the job. That was the good thing about routine. Your hands kept doing the work even when your head was somewhere else entirely. Her head was in the board meeting 2 hours from now, running through what she was going to say. The clear, factual timeline. The professional language for a professional situation. She had written notes and then not brought them because bringing notes would make her look like she'd prepared a defense. And preparing a defense implied she thought she needed one. And she wasn't going to walk into that room looking like a woman who thought she needed a defense. She was going to walk in looking like a librarian who had made reasonable professional decisions and could account for each of them. She believed this. She was working on believing it completely. Adeyes arrived at 8:20. Adeyes was the library's part-time program coordinator, 26 years old, with a collection of patterned head wraps she rotated on a schedule Charlotte had never cracked, and an absolute refusal to treat any problem as bigger than it actually was. She came through the door, unwrapped her coat, looked at Charlotte behind the reference desk and said, "How bad is it in your head right now?" "It's fine." Scale of 1 to the time the heating system died on story hour day. Charlotte considered. 6. Adeyes hung up her coat. 6 is manageable. 6 means you know what you're doing. She came behind the desk and picked up the early reader's cart. "What time is the meeting?" 10. "You want me to hold story hour so you don't have to hand it off mid-session?" "No, story hour goes at 9:30, normal schedule. The kids don't get disrupted because the board wants to have a conversation." Adeyes nodded once, like she'd expected exactly that answer. They worked in the kind of quiet that's not uncomfortable. The library's particular morning quiet, before the first patron, before the noise of the day. Charlotte put the holds on the shelf. Adeyes prepped the reading room. The coffee maker finished its work, and Charlotte poured 2 cups, and they stood at the desk together and drank them. At 9:05, the first patron of the day arrived. Not a regular. A woman Charlotte didn't recognize, mid-50s, wool coat, a tote bag with a university logo on it. She came in, looked around the library with the particular look of someone assessing a space rather than using it, and went to the periodicals section. Charlotte noticed her, filed it, went back to work. At 9:22, Charlotte was in the middle of signing off on the story hour book list when her phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number, Boston area code. She almost let it go to voicemail. Then something, she couldn't name what, some frequency in her chest, made her pick it up. Charlotte Hayes. Ms. Hayes. The voice was male, professionally modulated, the voice of someone accustomed to making calls that changed things. My name is Robert Fenn. I'm a reporter with the Boston Chronicle. I'm reaching out because we're running a piece in tomorrow's edition, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to comment before publication. She set down her pen. What piece? She said. A brief pause, the kind that meant he was deciding how much to give her. The piece concerns the Ashford Literacy Foundation and its relationship with a number of public institutions in Massachusetts, libraries, community centers, after-school programs. We've obtained internal communications that suggest that at least some of the foundation's funding may derive from sources that would not be considered appropriate for public charitable organizations. The reference desk had a small crack in the laminate surface in the lower left corner. Charlotte had looked at that crack approximately 8,000 times over 6 years. She was looking at it now. That's a very broad statement, she said. Her voice came out even. She was surprised by that. Yes, he said. The specifics are significant. I'm not at liberty to share the full documentation prior to publication, but the reason I'm calling you specifically is that your name appears in several of the communications in question. In relation to the Kenmore Branch Library Partnership Agreement. My name appears in Foundation communications because I'm party to a preservation agreement. That's not unusual. The communications I'm referring to are not about the preservation agreement, he said. They're about a conversation you had with Damian Blackwood at the Ashford Gala on October 9th. Something cold moved through her chest. What conversation? She said. According to an internal memo dated October 11th, the conversation you had with Mr. Blackwood at the gala was flagged internally as significant because of what you told him about the library's funding situation. The memo, and I want to be precise here, describes your disclosure of the library's financial difficulties as having been, quote, potentially useful leverage for continued public legitimacy. Charlotte didn't breathe for a second. That phrase, she said, was not something I said or agreed to. No, Fenn said. The memo was not written by you. It was written by someone else in the Foundation's senior structure. That's part of what makes it significant. She pressed her fingers flat against the desk. Who wrote it? I'm not able to share that before publication. Mr. Fenn, I genuinely am giving you the opportunity to comment, he said, and he sounded like he meant it, which was somehow worse. The piece runs tomorrow morning. If you have a statement, or if you want to go on record with your account of events, I'd like to include it. But I need it by 4 o'clock today. She looked at the corkboard across the room, Marcus's frog drawing, the story hour schedule in Adeaze's handwriting. I'll call you back, she said. She hung up. She set the phone on the desk very carefully, like it was something fragile or something that might go off. Adeaze appeared in the doorway of the reading room. She read Charlotte's face in approximately 1 second. Charlotte. Story hour at 9:30, Charlotte said. Normal schedule. Charlotte, I need 20 minutes. She picked up her phone and her keys and walked into the staff room and closed the door. She called Damian. He picked up on the second ring, which told her something. There's a reporter, she said without preamble. Boston Chronicle, Robert Fenn. He's running a piece tomorrow about the Foundation. He says he has internal memos. She kept her voice level. One of them describes my conversation with you at the gala as, he used the word leverage for continued public legitimacy. Silence on the other end. Damian, I heard you. Did you write that memo? No. Do you know who did? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell her the answer was yes. I have a board meeting in 80 minutes, she said. I have a reporter who wants a comment by 4 o'clock. I have a library full of kids who are about to start story hour, and I need you to tell me right now what is actually happening. Come to the tower after your board meeting, he said. I need more than that. I know. Damian, she put her back against the staff room wall. Was I used? Was the library used? Did someone in your organization look at me at a charity auction and decide I was useful and plan? No. The word came out hard and flat. That is not what happened. Then what happened? Victoria Sinclair wrote the memo, he said. I didn't know it existed until 40 minutes ago. The coffee maker dripped. The staff room hummed its small appliance hum. "Your foundation director," Charlotte said. "Yes." "She wrote a memo describing me as leverage." "Yes." "And you found out 40 minutes ago." "Yes." She closed her eyes for a second. 1 second. "Come to the tower after the board meeting," he said again. "I will tell you everything I know. Everything. You have my word." She opened her eyes. "Your word," she repeated, not cruelly, but not gently either. "I know what that's worth right now," he said. "Come anyway." She hung up. She stood in the staff room for 90 seconds, which was all she had. Then she washed her hands at the small sink, an automatic gesture, the kind the body makes to mark a transition, and she dried them on the paper towel, and she went back out to the library. Story hour at 9:30. 11 children. Adayez did the first book. Charlotte took the second and third. She did the voices. She did the frog. She watched Marcus in his spot on the purple cushion, mouth slightly open, utterly absorbed. At 10 o'clock, she handed the room to Adayez and walked to the conference room at the back of the library where the board met. Eleanor Goss was already there. 4 other board members, 2 of whom Charlotte recognized from previous meetings, and 2 she knew less well. And Charlotte's jaw tightened by approximately 1 millimeter, a woman she didn't recognize, sitting not at the board table but in the chair along the wall. Observer position. "Charlotte," Eleanor said, "please sit down." Charlotte sat. "Before we begin," Eleanor said, "I want to introduce Diane Marsh. Diane is a community liaison from the city's library oversight office." Charlotte looked at Diane Marsh. Diane Marsh was approximately 50 years old, with a professional expression and a notepad. "I wasn't informed there would be a city liaison present," Charlotte said. "The city office reached out to us yesterday," Eleanor said. Her voice was careful, and Charlotte knew Eleanor's careful voice. It was the voice she used when she was managing something she didn't like but felt she had to do. Given the media coverage, they felt it appropriate to have a representative present. "I see," Charlotte said. The meeting began. Eleanor ran it the way she ran everything, with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for decades and had strong opinions about not wasting time. She laid out the situation in factual terms. The media coverage following the gala, the nature of the foundation partnership agreement, the community feedback the board had received. Charlotte laid out her account, clear, sequential. She had memorized it well enough that she didn't need notes and could make eye contact while she said it. The gala, the conversation, the return of the book, the 41st floor meeting, the revised terms, the signed agreement. 3 board members nodded as she spoke. 1 wrote something on a notepad. The 5th, a man named Gerald Pruitt, who had been on the board for 11 years and had a consistent habit of asking the question no one else wanted to ask, waited until she finished and then said, "And the nature of your personal relationship with Mr. Blackwood?" "Professional," Charlotte said, "exactly as I've described it. The photographs were taken out of context at a charity event and captioned to imply something that didn't exist. The foundation issued a statement clarifying the professional nature of the relationship." "The foundation issued the statement," Pruitt said, "Mr. Blackwood's own organization, which has an interest in managing the narrative. The statement was accurate. Ms. Hayes." Diane Marsh spoke for the first time. Her voice was practiced in a specific way. Not unfriendly, not aggressive. The voice of someone who had learned to deliver difficult information without inflection. "I want to ask you a direct question, and I'd appreciate a direct answer." Charlotte turned to her. "Are you aware of any concerns that have been raised at any level about the sources of the Ashford Literacy Foundation's funding?" The room was very quiet. In the hallway outside, Charlotte could hear faintly the sound of Adayez's voice doing the frog voice for the story hour kids. "As of this morning," Charlotte said carefully, "I became aware that a news organization is working on a piece that raises questions about foundation funding. I do not have access to the documentation they reference, and I am not able to speak to its accuracy." Diane Marsh wrote something on her notepad. "Is that something you were aware of prior to signing the partnership agreement?" Marsh said. "No." "And if you had been aware of such concerns, I would not have signed," Charlotte said. "I would never sign an agreement that put this library's integrity at risk." But you did sign it, Pruitt said, without having done that investigation. The sentence landed in the room and sat there. Charlotte felt it. She didn't let it show on her face. I signed an agreement to preserve and display a valuable first edition children's book, she said. I did not sign an agreement with any element that compromised this library or its patrons. The due diligence on the Foundation's legitimacy is a level of investigation that is beyond the scope of what a branch librarian can reasonably be expected to conduct. Some would argue, Pruitt said, that accepting a partnership with a foundation of this profile required exactly that investigation. Charlotte looked at him directly. Gerald, I run a library with 33% of the funding it had 4 years ago. I read to 40 kids a week in a room with floor cushions because the chairs are in storage, because we don't have the budget to maintain them. I accepted a partnership to preserve a book that those kids can hold and read from a foundation that the city of Boston has itself partnered with on multiple occasions. She kept her voice even with some effort. If there are concerns about the foundation's funding sources, those concerns exist at a level that predates my involvement by years, and they should be directed at the appropriate level of city oversight, which is represented in this room. Diane Marsh's pen stopped moving. The meeting continued for another 22 minutes. By the end of it, nothing had been resolved, which meant the board hadn't done the thing Charlotte had feared most. It hadn't moved to terminate the partnership or censure her formally. What it had done was open a review process, which was better and worse than a resolution in specific ways that Charlotte parsed very precisely on the walk from the conference room back to the reference desk. Better because no immediate consequences. Worse because it wasn't over. At 12:15, she took her lunch break, which she spent on the phone with the Boston Chronicle's Robert Fenn, giving him a statement that she had written in her head during the last 22 minutes of the board meeting. Professional, factual, clear about what she knew and what she didn't. She read it to him twice at his request. He read it back. She confirmed. At 1:30, she left Adaye's in charge and walked to Blackwood Tower. She didn't take an Uber. She walked. 40 minutes through the October air, which was cold enough now that her breath made a small cloud, and she was glad she'd brought her heavier coat. She walked because she needed the time and the movement, the physical fact of her feet on pavement, before she walked into that building again. The lobby guard knew her now. He called up without her asking. She went to 41. Damien was not at the window this time. He was at the table, the actual conference table, not his desk. And there were papers in front of him, and he looked like a man who had spent the morning doing something that had cost him. He stood when she came in. She waved a hand that meant don't. She sat down across from him. "Tell me everything," she said. He did. It took 40 minutes. He didn't use notes. He spoke in the same measured way he always spoke, but this time the layers under the measurement were more visible. The tiredness, the controlled anger at himself for the parts that were his fault, the controlled anger at Victoria for the parts that were hers. The picture that assembled itself as he talked was this. Victoria Sinclair had been with the Blackwood organization for 4 years. She had come from a financial consulting background, had been hired initially to manage the legitimate foundation's accounting structure, and had positioned herself steadily and deliberately into the role of Damien's closest advisor. Not because he'd chosen her for that role, because she'd made herself indispensable, and he'd allowed it without examining why. The memo about Charlotte was not an isolated thing. It was, Damien had discovered this morning, one of a series of documents Victoria had created over the past 3 weeks. Assessments of Charlotte's potential usefulness as cover for the Foundation's public profile. Analyses of how to leverage the library partnership for positive media positioning. And the piece that had made Damien's jaw go tight in a way Charlotte could see even now. One document that had been shared with an outside party whose name Damien said he was still working to confirm. "You think she's the source?" Charlotte said. "Yes." She gave the Chronicle the memos, including the one with your name in it. He put his hands flat on the table. She gave them something that would damage the Foundation, and damage you. Charlotte sat with this for a moment, assembled it. Why would she damage the Foundation? She works for the Foundation. Damien was quiet for 3 seconds. "Because the story isn't actually about the Foundation," he said. "The story damages me. It damages my public credibility, creates regulatory attention, and forces me to spend time and resources managing a crisis instead of... He stopped. Instead of what? He looked at her. Instead of whatever she's decided you represent. The words sat between them. Charlotte leaned back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, the expensively subtle ceiling of a 41st floor conference room, and thought about a woman she'd seen at a charity gala in a black architectural dress who had said something just loud enough to be heard and laughed with just enough people to make it land. She thinks I'm a threat, Charlotte said. Yes. To what, exactly? He didn't answer. Damien. To something she's been building for 4 years, he said. That I was never fully aware she was building. Charlotte looked at him. He looked back at her with the specific expression of a man who was being honest about something that embarrassed him, not the performed humility of someone managing an image, but the actual physical discomfort of a person admitting he'd been willfully inattentive to something he should have seen. She is in love with you, Charlotte said. It wasn't a question. I don't know if that's the right word for it. It doesn't matter if it's the right word, Charlotte said. It's the functional reality. And she watched you pay attention to me for 30 minutes at a charity gala and decided I needed to be removed before you paid more attention. He didn't disagree. Charlotte stood up. She went to the window, not because she wanted the view, but because she needed to be moving, needed the few feet of distance to think. The Chronicle piece runs tomorrow, she said. Whatever's in it, it runs tomorrow. The board has opened a review of the partnership. The city liaison is involved. My name is in foundation documents that are now in the possession of a newspaper. She turned around. And the person who put it there still works for you. Not as of... He looked at his watch. 40 minutes ago. You fired her? I terminated her position with the foundation, yes. Does she know why? She knows I know about the memo. Charlotte thought about what a woman like Victoria Sinclair, with 4 years of access to the inner workings of a man like Damien Blackwood, might do when she discovered she had nothing left to lose. What else does she know? Charlotte said. About you, about the other parts. He was quiet. How much of it could she give to the Chronicle? Charlotte said. Enough, he said. Enough to do what? He looked at her steadily. Enough to be significant. Charlotte pressed her fingers against the glass. It was cold against her hand. Outside, the city moved. Traffic, people, the harbor glinting silver in the October light. I need you to understand what you've done, she said. She wasn't shouting. She was past shouting. Her voice had gone to the place that comes after shouting, the flat, clear place. You brought my name into your world. You did that. Not Victoria. She used what you created. You are the one who bought the book. You are the one who sat across from me at a table for an hour and revised terms and signed a contract. Whatever you thought you were doing, I know what I did. Then tell me, because I can't figure out. She turned from the window. What was this? What was the plan here? What did you think was going to happen? He looked at her for a long moment. I didn't have a plan, he said. Don't. I didn't, he said. That's the honest answer, and I know it sounds... He stopped. I saw someone at a charity event who was wet and late and entirely unconcerned with impressing anyone in the room, and she told me about 40 kids and a frog book and the way a story can stay past the last page. He met her eyes. I didn't plan what happened after that. He exhaled. I didn't want to stop talking to her. The room was very quiet. Charlotte looked at him, at the man behind the stillness, the man behind the controlled, expensive surface of him, and felt the specific, complicated thing of being seen by someone who had no business seeing you clearly and had done it anyway. That doesn't fix this, she said. No, he said. It doesn't. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a text from Adeyeze. 3 words. Come back now. And below it, a screenshot of a tweet posted 22 minutes ago by a verified media account with an attached photograph. The photograph was taken through the glass front of the Kenmore Branch Library, from the street, through the window. It showed Charlotte and Damien at the staff room table, his hands flat on the surface, hers around a coffee cup, both of them leaning slightly forward in the posture of two people deep in a conversation they didn't want overheard. The caption read, "Exclusive, Blackwood's Librarian, months of secret meetings at public library." Inside the relationship Boston's most powerful man doesn't want you to know about. Charlotte stared at the screen, the woman in the wool coat, the tote bag with the university logo. She'd come into the library at 9:05 and gone to the periodical section, and Charlotte had filed it and gone back to work. There was a car outside the library that morning. Of course there was. She looked up at Damien. Her face was the still face, the chin-up face, the face she'd been wearing since she was 8 years old when things became too large and her body learned to go quiet instead. "They were already there," she said, "before I called you, before you knew about the memo." He looked at the screen. "Victoria gave them a schedule," he said, and his voice had changed. It had gone to a place underneath the control, something she hadn't heard before, something that had actual heat in it. "She knew you were coming to the library this morning. She knew—" He stopped, recalibrated. "She planned this before I fired her. The firing was already too late." Charlotte looked at the photograph of herself. The small, ordinary, staff room version of herself, hands around a coffee cup, in a conversation she'd thought was private, on a screen that was now visible to anyone with a phone. Tomorrow, the Chronicle piece would run. Tonight, this photograph would spread. The board review was already open. The city liaison had a notepad. And somewhere in Boston, a woman who had spent 4 years building something and watched it evaporate in a week was deciding what she still had left to spend. Charlotte put her phone in her pocket. She picked up her coat from the chair. "I have to go back to the library," she said. "Charlotte, my kids are there," she said. "They're going to hear things. Their parents are going to hear things. I need to be there when that happens." She buttoned her coat. Her hands were steady. She noticed that, and she didn't entirely understand it, but she was grateful for it. "What are you going to do?" he said. She looked at him. "I'm going to be the librarian," she said. She walked to the door. And behind her, Damien Blackwood, who had not been afraid of anything in a very long time, sat at the table in his 41st floor conference room and understood, with a clarity that arrived like something cold and exact, that the most dangerous person in this situation was not a reporter or a board or a city liaison or even Victoria with 4 years of what she knew. The most dangerous person was a children's librarian from Dorchester who had just discovered that the careful, ordinary life she'd built was going to be tested in public, and who had walked toward the door instead of away from it. And he had no idea how to protect her from what was coming or whether she would let him try. The walk back to the library took 38 minutes. Charlotte walked fast. Not running. She didn't run. But the kind of fast walking that uses the whole foot and keeps the jaw set and doesn't look at phone screens or storefront windows or anything that isn't the next block and the block after that. The October air hit her face, and she let it. Cold was useful. Cold kept you present. Her phone buzzed 4 times in her coat pocket. She didn't look at it. She turned onto her street at 219 and saw the first news van from the corner. It was parked across from the library. One of the local affiliates, she recognized the logo on the side. A woman in a red coat stood on the sidewalk with a microphone speaking to a camera. Behind her, through the library's glass front, Charlotte could see Adeze at the reference desk, and she could see 3 parents who had come for early pickup standing near the door with the particular body language of people who were not sure whether to leave. Charlotte walked straight toward the front door. The woman in the red coat saw her coming and turned, and her face did the thing that faces do when a target arrives. "Ms. Hayes, can you comment on the photographs released this morning?" Charlotte did not stop walking. "Ms. Hayes, are you in a romantic relationship with Damien Blackwood?" She pushed through the front door. Inside, the smell of books and old carpet and the faint ghost of this morning's coffee. Adiez was at the desk. 2 of the 3 parents were near the door. One of them, a woman named Priya, whose daughter Nisha was one of Charlotte's best story hour readers, was already moving toward her with a face that said she was trying to keep it together for everyone else's benefit and not entirely succeeding. "Charlotte," Priya's voice was low and tight. "There are cameras outside. I see them. Nisha is in the reading room. I don't want her—" "She's fine," Charlotte said. "The reading room is at the back. They can't see in from the street. She put her hand briefly on Priya's arm. Not long, just long enough to mean something. Let me sort this out. She looked at Adayeze over Priya's shoulder. Adayeze held up her phone. 4 more texts, 2 missed calls, and the number on the viral tweet was climbing. Charlotte nodded once. Adayeze put the phone away. Can everyone give me 10 minutes? Charlotte said. To the parents, to the room. I'm going to make some calls. In 10 minutes, I'll come back out and tell you exactly what I know. Priya looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded and went back to the reading room. Charlotte went to the staff room. She closed the door. She sat down at the wobbly table and put both hands flat on the surface and took 3 measured breaths, not calming herself down exactly, more like taking inventory, checking what was still there, what still worked. Then she opened her phone. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, 6 voicemails. She scrolled through without listening or reading, looking only for names she recognized, and found 3. Dana, Eleanor Goss, and one that made her jaw tighten by a degree she didn't bother to control. Victoria Sinclair. She called Donna first. I'm outside in my car, Dana said, before Charlotte could speak. 3 blocks east. Do you need me in there? Not yet. What's it look like online? It's moving fast. The photo's been up for 40 minutes, and it's already at a pause, clicking sounds. 6,000 shares. Someone identified you from your library staff page. There's a Reddit thread. What's the angle? Most of it is the romantic narrative, but there's a subset pushing the foundation funding story. The Chronicle piece isn't out until tomorrow, but someone leaked the headline. Blackwood Foundation under investigation, charity funds traced to criminal enterprise. That's the headline. Charlotte closed her eyes for 1 second. Charlotte, I'm here. How bad is the actual situation? Not the media situation. The actual one. Complicated, Charlotte said. His foundation director, former as of today. She's the source. She's been leaking since before I knew what was happening. Dana was quiet for a moment. She set you up. She used me to set him up, Charlotte said. I was the mechanism, the photograph, the memo, the timing. She planned it while she still had access. What does Blackwood say? He says he's handling it. Do you believe him? Charlotte looked at the corkboard. Marcus's frog. The story hour schedule. I believe he means to, she said. Whether he can is a different question. She hung up with Dana and sat for 30 seconds with the phone in her hand. Then she opened the voicemail from Victoria Sinclair and put the phone to her ear. Victoria's voice on the voicemail was not what Charlotte expected. She'd expected cold. She'd expected the precision instrument register from the Gala. What she got was something else. The voice of someone who had stopped performing and was speaking from the raw, ugly place underneath. I want you to understand something, the voicemail said. What's happening right now isn't about you. I need you to know that. It was never about you. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong man, and A pause. The sound of breath being managed. I need you to understand that there are things about Damian Blackwood that you don't know, that you can't know and stay where you are. And the kindest thing anyone can do for you right now is make sure you leave before you find out what they are the hard way. Another pause. I'm sorry about the library. I am. The kids shouldn't... The voice stopped. Then, leave it alone, Ms. Hayes. Walk away from the agreement and walk away from him, and this stops. The voicemail ended. Charlotte set the phone down on the table. She sat for a moment with Victoria Sinclair's voice still in her head. Not the words exactly, but the texture of them. The sound of someone who had been in love with a person for 4 years, had built everything around a proximity that was never really reciprocated, and had finally broken in a specific and catastrophic direction. She wasn't afraid of Victoria Sinclair. She was, she realized, in some part of herself that she didn't usually examine, very tired. She stood up. She went back out to the reference desk. The third parent, a man she knew as Daniel, whose son Jalen was 7 and loved anything about dinosaurs, had joined Priya near the reading room door. Both of them looked at Charlotte when she appeared. Here's what I know, Charlotte said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't modify it. She used her story hour voice, The one that made children stop moving because it was clear and close and didn't perform urgency. I have a partnership agreement with the Ashford Foundation to preserve a first edition book that your kids have already touched and read. That agreement is under review by the library board. There are news people outside because I was photographed in a meeting with the foundation's director. I am not in a romantic relationship with anyone from the foundation. Everything I have done professionally in connection with this library has been on behalf of the children who use it, and I stand by every decision. She paused. Your kids are fine. The library is open. If you want to take them home early because of the cameras outside, I completely understand, and I will walk you out the back if you prefer. Daniel looked at Priya. Priya looked at Charlotte. The back exit, Priya said. Please. Charlotte walked them out. Nisha, 8 years old and oblivious to media cycles, complained that she hadn't finished the chapter, and Charlotte told her she could take the book home, and Nisha's face resolved itself into satisfaction. When Charlotte came back inside, the library was down to Adeyeze and 4 children whose parents hadn't arrived yet for pickup. The news van was still outside. Charlotte's phone buzzed with a number she recognized this time, Eleanor Goss. She answered. I've seen the photograph, Eleanor said. Yes. The city liaison office has been in contact again. They're requesting a formal review of the partnership agreement status. That's their right. Charlotte. Eleanor paused. Is there anything you need to tell the board that you didn't tell us this morning? Charlotte thought about Victoria's voicemail. She thought about the 41st floor and the conversation with Dana and Damien's face when he said the word significant. Not yet, she said. I'll know more tomorrow when the Chronicle piece runs. And in the meantime? In the meantime, I'm running the library. A silence. Then, I've known you for 6 years, Charlotte. I know. I trust your judgment. I want that on the record. Charlotte felt something move in her chest that she didn't have a name for immediately. Thank you, Eleanor. She hung up. At 4:13, the Chronicle published the piece online. Early, not tomorrow morning. Tonight. Someone had made the call to move it up, probably because the photograph had changed the news cycle's timing and they wanted the piece to drive the story rather than follow it. Charlotte read it at the reference desk on her laptop, while Adeyeze helped the last 2 children find their coats. It was thorough. It was sourced. It had documentation, internal memos, financial flow charts, a former foundation accountant who spoke on background about what he'd characterized as unusual fund movements through the foundation's grant-making accounts. The memo with Charlotte's name was reproduced in its relevant paragraph, with appropriate context. Her statement was quoted in full in the 14th paragraph. The reporter had kept his word about that. The piece was careful to distinguish between what was alleged and what was confirmed. But what was alleged was significant, and the careful language didn't change that. What the piece was saying in clear professional journalism was that the Ashford Literacy Foundation, the organization whose name was now on a signed agreement in the Kenmore Branch Library's files, had likely received substantial funding from sources that would not survive regulatory scrutiny. Charlotte finished reading. She closed the laptop. She looked up and found Adeyeze standing across the desk from her, coat on, keys in hand, looking at her with steady, dark eyes. Go home, Charlotte said. I'll stay. Adeyeze, go home. I'll lock up. A pause. Call me if you need me. I mean that. Any hour. I know you do. Adeyeze left through the back. Charlotte locked the front door from the inside. The library's posted hours had ended at 5, and turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the lower lights on at the desk. The news van outside moved its camera spotlight, and the white light came through the front windows and made long rectangles on the floor. She was standing there, not doing anything in particular, when something happened outside. Not something she heard, something she felt. The way you feel a change in a room's pressure before you see what's caused it. She went to the front window and looked out. Victoria Sinclair was standing on the sidewalk outside the library. Not the news crew, not a reporter. Victoria Sinclair herself, in a coat that was not the architectural black dress, but something darker and plainer, and she was standing on the sidewalk looking at the front of the library with an expression that was impossible to read from this distance. The news crew was 20 feet from her. They hadn't identified her. Why would they? Victoria's public profile was administrative, foundation events, the kind of institutional presence that most people couldn't pick out of a lineup. Charlotte stood at the window and looked at her for a long moment. Then she unlocked the front door and opened it. Victoria didn't move. Charlotte stepped out onto the sidewalk into the cold and the news crew's ambient light. The reporter in the red coat turned toward her immediately. "Ms. Hayes." "I have no comment at this time," Charlotte said, without looking at her. She was looking at Victoria. Victoria's face was not what it had been at the gala. The gala face, the precision, the performance of warmth, the practiced smile, was gone. What was there now was a face that had been doing something difficult for a long time and had finally stopped being able to hide it. "Somewhere else," Charlotte said. Victoria looked at her. "There's a coffee shop on Ruggles," Charlotte said. 3 blocks north. I'll be there in 10 minutes. She went back inside. She got her coat and her bag. She turned off the last light and locked the door and walked north on Ruggles without looking back at the news crew, who filmed her leaving because they couldn't help themselves. The coffee shop was half empty and warm. Charlotte got there first, ordered 2 coffees, black for herself, milk and sugar for Victoria, a guess that turned out to be right, and sat at a table in the back corner where the angle made it difficult to photograph from outside. Victoria came in 6 minutes later. She sat down across the table. She looked at the coffee with milk and sugar, and something crossed her face that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite anything else. "You didn't have to do this," Victoria said. "I know. I expected—" "I don't care what you expected," Charlotte said. Not harshly, just directly. "Talk to me." Victoria wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Her hands were the hands of a person who had not been sleeping well. The specific visible tension in the tendons, the way the knuckles sat slightly wrong. "The memo," Victoria said. "I wrote it to protect the foundation. That's what I told myself. The public legitimacy framing, that was a real strategic concern. If the foundation's image was linked to something with the wrong optics, don't," Charlotte said. Victoria stopped. "Don't tell me the professional rationale," Charlotte said. "Tell me the actual reason." A silence. Outside, a truck went past. The coffee shop's radio played something Charlotte didn't recognize. "He looked at you," Victoria said, the way he used to look at things before he stopped looking. She said it quietly, like a fact she'd learned to carry. "There was a time, the first year when I came to the foundation, when he would look at something he actually cared about, and you could see it. His whole face would change. Not dramatically. You had to know what you were looking for." She paused. "I learned what to look for." Charlotte didn't say anything. "He stopped," Victoria said. "After whoever she was, the woman before, he just stopped. It was like a room where the light went off. Still there, still functional, still running everything exactly as it needed to be run. But the thing that made it—" She stopped, found the next word. "Human. Gone." She looked at the table. "And then you walked in with wet shoes and a borrowed dress, and he sat down at your table, and I watched his face for 3 hours, and I—" She stopped again. The muscles in her jaw worked. "I'd been waiting 4 years for that, for whatever it took to make that happen, and it took you 30 minutes. The coffee shop radio changed songs. Charlotte looked at this woman, at the specific visible ruins of 4 years of wanting something that looked like love but had been shaped more like strategy, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was pity. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that costs something, because it means acknowledging that the person in front of you is fully human and has done terrible things, and both of those things are true at once. "What did you give the Chronicle?" Charlotte said. Victoria looked up. "Everything?" Charlotte said. A pause. "Enough," Victoria said. And in that word, Charlotte heard the echo of the word Damien had used in his 41st floor office. Enough. The specific amount that changes things permanently. "The financial documentation," Victoria said, "the fund movement records, the names of the intermediary accounts." She set down her coffee cup. "Enough to require an audit. Enough that the regulatory pressure becomes real. Enough to hurt him. Yes." "Did you think about the libraries?" Charlotte said. "The other ones, the ones the foundation actually funds. There are," she paused, doing the number, 47 public library partnerships in Massachusetts alone. The money those libraries depend on, I know. Victoria's voice cracked on the second word, the first crack in the whole conversation. I know what I did. Charlotte sat with that. You called me, Charlotte said. The voicemail. You told me to walk away. Yes. But you'd already given them the story. Yes. So telling me to walk away was too late, Victoria said. I know. I knew when I left the message. She looked at her hands. I left it anyway. The table between them was small and plain and had a ring from someone's previous cup on the surface. Charlotte looked at it. What do you want from me? Charlotte said. You came to the library. You came here. What is it you want? Victoria looked up. I don't know, she said, and it was the first thing she'd said in the entire conversation that felt entirely, uncomplicatedly true. Charlotte's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it. Damien. She let it go to voicemail. Here's what's going to happen, Charlotte said. She said it the way she said things to the board. Direct, clear, not leaving room for interpretation. The Chronicle piece is already out. The audit will happen. The regulatory process will run whatever course it runs. Those things are in motion and neither of us can stop them. Victoria nodded. The library's partnership agreement is under review, Charlotte continued. That review will either clear the agreement or it won't. Either way, the book stays in the display case until a decision is made because it belongs to the children who have already read it, and I will fight that if I have to. I won't contest. I'm not asking for your permission, Charlotte said. Victoria closed her mouth. And you, Charlotte said, are going to be very careful about what else you decide to do or say or release, because whatever it is you're telling yourself about protecting yourself or hurting him or making things even, it will land on those 47 libraries and those kids before it lands on him. He has resources they don't have. Remember that. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. You're not angry at me, she said. She said it with a kind of confused wondering, the way you say something when the emotional math doesn't add up to what you were expecting. I'm furious at you, Charlotte said, but you're not the main problem right now, so I'm putting it aside. She stood up. She left a 20 on the table to cover both coffees. She walked out into the dark and cold of the October night and took out her phone and called Damien back. He answered before the first ring finished. I just spoke with her, Charlotte said. Where are you? Walking back to the library to get my bike. A pause. She gave them everything she had. The audit is going to happen. I know. I've been on with legal for the past 2 hours. And? A pause. The kind that meant the news wasn't simple. It's containable, he said. Most of what she gave them documents legitimate fund movements that were flagged internally as unusual but are ultimately defensible. There's one section, Charlotte repeated. One set of transactions from 2019, before I restructured the foundation's accounting. He stopped. It's more complicated than the rest. How complicated? Enough that my legal team is recommending I get ahead of it. Get ahead of it how? By going to the regulatory authority directly before they come to us, with full disclosure, with an offer to cooperate fully and, he paused, and with the announcement of a significant restructuring of both the foundation and the affiliated businesses. Charlotte stopped walking. She was on Ruggles Street, halfway between the coffee shop and the library, under a streetlight that buzzed faintly against the dark. Her breath made its small cloud in the cold. Affiliated businesses, she said. He didn't answer immediately. Damien. The syndicate, he said quietly. The restructuring has to include... He stopped. There are people who work for me who have been doing what they do for a long time. Some of them are not going to be happy about a restructuring. Not happy, Charlotte repeated, and the flatness in her voice contained multitudes. I'm not talking about violence, he said. Not toward you, not toward anyone at the library. I need you to hear that. I hear it. But the people who have a stake in the current structure, who stand to lose from a restructuring, they're not people who accept change quietly. There will be pressure. It'll be complicated. For weeks. Maybe months. Charlotte stood under the buzzing streetlight. You're telling me this is going to get worse before it gets better, she said. Yes. And you're telling me because you're in it, he said.
whether you chose to be or not, because your name is in those memos, and your library is in the Chronicle, and the photograph is everywhere, and I—" He stopped. When he started again, his voice had gone to that place she'd heard once before, underneath the control, the real temperature of the thing. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know what's coming, and because I need to know that you're—" He stopped again. "That I'm what?" Silence. 4 seconds. 5. "Safe," he said. "I need to know that you're safe." Charlotte turned that word over. Coming from him, she understood it was not a small word. It was a word that carried the specific weight of a man who understood what unsafe looked like because he had created it for other people, and who was now sitting in his 41st floor office, reckoning with what it meant to have brought that world close to someone who hadn't signed up for it. "I'm standing on Ruggles Street," she said. "I'm fine." "Charlotte, I'll call you tomorrow after I've read the full Chronicle piece again and thought about what I want to do," she said. "But right now I need you to answer one question." "Ask it." "Is there any version of what you're planning, the restructuring, the disclosure, whatever you're deciding tonight, is there any version where the foundation continues in a form that is actually clean, actually legitimate, that could survive an audit and a regulatory review and still fund libraries?" The pause this time was longer. "Yes," he said finally. "That's the version I'm working toward." "Is it the most likely outcome?" Another pause. "It's the outcome I'm going to make happen," he said. Charlotte thought about the difference between those two answers. "Okay," she said. She hung up. She walked the remaining block and a half to the library. The news van was still there. Same spot, different reporter now, the night shift. And the camera swung toward her automatically when she appeared. She ignored it. She unlocked the library's side door. She went in the dark, and the book smell, and the quiet. And she got her bike from the storage room and walked it out. She was locking the side door when a car pulled up, black, no markings. And the window came down, and the man in the passenger seat was not anyone she recognized. He was 40 or so, broad, with a face that had been rearranged at some point by something and had healed in an interesting direction. "Ms. Hayes," he said. Charlotte's hand stilled on the key. "My name is Carver," he said. "I work for Mr. Blackwood. He asked me to make sure you got home safely tonight." She looked at the car. She looked at Carver. "He asked you to follow me home," she said. "He asked me to ensure your safety," Carver said, with the specific precision of someone who understood the difference between those two things. Charlotte took the key out of the lock. She put it in her pocket. She gripped the handlebars of her bike. "Tell Mr. Blackwood," she said, "that I appreciate the concern. And tell him that if he sends a car to follow me home again without asking me first, I will ride in the opposite direction." Carver looked at her. "I'll tell him," he said. He sounded like he might almost be amused. She got on her bike. She rode. Behind her, the black car pulled out and followed at a distance that was just outside the edge of her peripheral vision. Close enough to matter, far enough to mean something about the man who'd sent it. She rode through the dark and the cold, her breath making its cloud, the city doing its nighttime things around her, and she thought about 47 libraries and a first edition book in a glass case, and a man in a 41st floor office deciding, tonight, what version of himself he was going to be. The Chronicle piece was going to trend until morning. The photograph was already everywhere. The board review was open, the city liaison had her notepad, and somewhere in Boston, Victoria Sinclair was sitting with whatever she was sitting with. And tomorrow morning at 7:58, Charlotte Hayes was going to unlock the front door of the Kenmore Branch Library, turn off the alarm, and start the coffee maker. Because that was what she did. What happened after that? What came through the door? What the day brought? What a powerful man decided about the shape of his own life? She would handle when it arrived. But it was going to arrive. She knew that now. She got home at 8:47. She locked her bike in the hallway of her building the way she always did, looping the chain through the frame and around the pipe that ran along the baseboard, the same pipe she'd been locking it to for 4 years. Her fingers did it without looking. Her fingers knew the combination by touch. She went upstairs, she unlocked her apartment.
She took off her coat and her shoes, and she stood in the middle of her kitchen in her socks, and she stood there for a moment doing nothing, which was something she rarely allowed herself. The apartment was quiet, not the library's quiet. This was smaller. Her refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. The building settled with its particular old building language, the creak and shift of something that had been standing long enough to have opinions about the weather. She made toast. She didn't want toast especially, but she hadn't eaten since the morning, and her body was sending signals that had started getting harder to ignore on the bike ride home. She stood at the kitchen counter and ate the toast over the sink the way she did when she didn't feel like setting a place. And she looked out the small window above the sink at the back alley and the brick wall beyond it and the rectangle of October sky above that. She thought about the voicemail from Victoria, the coffee shop, the weight of 4 years in a woman's voice. She thought about Damien in his 41st floor office doing his math about what version of himself to be. She thought about Marcus with the frog drawing, about Nisha carrying the book home because she hadn't finished the chapter. She finished the toast. She rinsed the plate. She went to bed. She did not sleep well, but she slept. At 6:52, her alarm pulled her out of something she didn't remember, and she got up and got dressed in the dark. She was at the library at 7:58. The news van was gone. The sidewalk was empty in the way sidewalks are empty in the early morning before the day decides what it's going to be. She unlocked the door, turned off the alarm, started the coffee maker. She read the Chronicle piece again in full while the coffee brewed on her laptop at the reference desk in the half-light. She read it slowly this time, not the way she'd read it last night, in the hot, pressurized way of reading something terrible, but slowly, the way she read things she needed to actually understand. She noted what it said and what it didn't say. She noted the careful language. She noted her own statement in the 14th paragraph and the way it read. Factual, clear, the voice of someone who knew exactly what she knew and nothing more. The piece was significant. There was no honest version of reading it that made it less than that. At 8:15, Adayeze came in. She looked at Charlotte, and then at the coffee, and then she poured herself a cup and came and stood beside the reference desk. "So," Adayeze said. "So," Charlotte said. "What are we doing today?" Charlotte closed the laptop. "Running the library." Adayeze drank her coffee. "Okay." At 9:03, Eleanor Goss called. "I've read the piece," Eleanor said. "Yes." The board had an emergency call this morning at 7:30. Charlotte's hands were still on the desk. "The decision was unanimous," Eleanor said, and then she paused, which was the kind of pause that contained the weight of what came next. "We're suspending the partnership agreement pending the outcome of the regulatory review." Charlotte had known this was coming. She had known it since last night. Knowing it and hearing it were different. "The display case," Charlotte said, "the book will remain in the case for now. The board felt strongly that removing it abruptly while children are actively using it would be," Eleanor paused, "unnecessarily disruptive. But no further foundation involvement, no further financial relationship until the review is complete." "I understand," Charlotte said. "Charlotte." Eleanor's voice changed slightly, not less professional, but warmer inside the professionalism. "For what it's worth, the board's decision about the partnership is not a decision about you. I want that to be clear." "Thank you, Eleanor." "And for what else it's worth," Eleanor said, "I read your statement in that piece. It was exactly right." She hung up. Adayeze had gone to the reading room to set up for story hour. Charlotte sat for a moment with her hands on the desk and looked at the display case across the room. The custom archival case, the custom lighting, the first edition of The Lighthouse Keeper's Son, open to the illustration of the boy on the dock. She had held that book when she was 8 years old, and it had told her something about the world that she still believed. Stories stay. Past the last page, past the people who give them to you, past whatever complications arrive in the middle of a life. They stay. She got up and went to set up the reading corner. The Chronicle piece, by 10:30 that morning, had been picked up by 6 national outlets. By noon, it had been referenced in 2 financial news broadcasts. By 1 in the afternoon, the regulatory authority had issued a statement confirming that a preliminary inquiry into the Ashford Literacy Foundation's financial practices was underway. Charlotte knew all of this because Adayez was monitoring it on her phone and providing quiet updates at intervals. Charlotte listened and nodded and kept running the library. At 2:15, a call came in from a number she recognized as Blackwood Tower's main line, not Damien's direct number. She let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was from his assistant, asking her to call at her convenience, stating that Mr. Blackwood had a prepared statement he wanted to share with her before it was released. She called back at 3. The assistant put her through. Damien picked up and said, "Thank you for calling back." And she said, "What's the statement?" And he read it to her. It was 4 paragraphs. She listened to all of it. The statement announced that Damien Blackwood was voluntarily cooperating with the regulatory authorities' inquiry into the Ashford Literacy Foundation. It announced that an independent audit had been commissioned. It announced that the foundation's existing community partnerships, all 47 of them, would be maintained through a separately capitalized account held in trust by an independent board, pending the outcome of the inquiry, such that no community institution would lose programming due to the foundation's regulatory situation. That was the 3rd paragraph. The 4th paragraph announced that Blackwood Industries was beginning a comprehensive restructuring process under the oversight of an independent compliance board, and that Damien Blackwood would be stepping back from operational control of the foundation for the duration of the inquiry. Charlotte listened to the 4th paragraph. Then she said, "The 3rd paragraph." "Yes," he said. "The separately capitalized account, the independent board." "Yes." "That's real," she said. That's not PR. That's actual money protected in an actual structure." "Yes," he said. "It's real." She thought about 47 libraries, about what it meant to lose a funding line in the middle of a fiscal year. "How much?" she said. He told her the number. She sat with it for a moment. It was a very large number. It was the kind of number that didn't fix what had been broken, but did mean that 47 libraries wouldn't have to choose between their book budgets and their heat. "Okay," she said. "The statement goes out at 4, he said. "I wanted you to have it first." She looked at the display case, the boy on the dock. "There's something you should know," she said. "Tell me." The board suspended the partnership agreement this morning, pending the regulatory review. A pause. "I expected that," he said. "The book stays for now. The kids have been using it." "Good," he said, and the word was plain and specific, and she believed he meant it exactly as he said it. "Damien." She stopped, started again. "The restructuring, the 4th paragraph, the compliance board. What does that mean for the—" She chose the word carefully. "The rest of it, the part that isn't in the foundation." The pause this time was longer. "It means," he said slowly, "that I'm doing something I should have done a long time ago." He paused again. "Some of it is going to take time. Some of it is—" He stopped. "There are people involved who have been doing what they do for a long time. Unraveling that is not a thing that happens in a statement." "I know that. But the direction is clear," he said. "The direction has been clear for a while. He exhaled. "I needed something to make the cost of not going that direction feel real." She understood what he was saying. She understood what she was in that sentence, and she sat with it without deflecting it. "Is it going to be dangerous?" she said. "The unraveling." "For me, possibly. For a period. For anyone else." "I'm taking precautions," he said. "Real ones. Not sending cars to follow librarians home without asking." Something in Charlotte's chest moved slightly. "You heard about that," she said. "Carver has excellent communication skills," he said. And there was something in his voice, not quite humor, but the ghost of it, the way humor exists in people who have forgotten how to use it regularly and find it strange when it appears. "Ask next time," she said. "I will," he said. The statement went out at 4. Charlotte read it on the library's computer between helping a man find books on beekeeping and checking in a stack of returns. She read the 3rd paragraph twice. The next several weeks moved the way things move when they are bad, and also being managed. Not smoothly. There is no smooth version of a regulatory inquiry and a public restructuring and the news cycle turning something over and over. But managed.
day by day, decision by decision, the way you manage anything that is larger than you, not by controlling it, but by staying upright inside it. The board review ran for 3 weeks. Charlotte went to 2 formal sessions and submitted a written account and answered questions from the city liaison, Diane Marsh, who turned out to be methodical and fair in equal measure.
Eleanor Goss attended both sessions and said little and watched everything with the eyes of a woman who had been navigating institutional politics for 40 years. The independent audit of the foundation was completed in 6 weeks. Its findings were what Damien's legal team had indicated they would be. The 2019 transactions were flagged. Everything after the restructuring of the foundation's accounting was clean. The regulatory authority imposed a fine and a 2-year monitoring arrangement. It did not move to dissolve the foundation. The 47 community partnerships, including the Kenmore branch, were formally transferred to the independent trust at the end of November. Charlotte received the transfer documentation on a Tuesday afternoon and read it at the reference desk and then went to find Adaez and showed it to her. Adaez read it. She looked up. "So it's real," she said. "It's real," Charlotte said. Adaez looked at the display case. "Good," she said, with the efficiency of someone who had been quietly holding her breath for 6 weeks and was now, just as quietly, letting it go. The board formally reinstated the partnership agreement in December after the independent trust was confirmed. Eleanor called Charlotte to tell her, and Charlotte said thank you, and Eleanor said there was no need, and Charlotte said it anyway. Victoria Sinclair did not go quietly, but she went. Her departure from the Blackwood organization, forced, documented, effective the day Damien terminated her position, became part of the story that the media told about the restructuring. She gave one interview to a magazine in January in which she spoke about her years with the foundation in terms that were not untrue but were carefully shaped. She did not mention Charlotte by name. Charlotte read the interview once and did not read it again. What she thought about, and did not say to anyone except Dana, was the coffee shop on Ruggles Street. The coffee with milk and sugar. The sound of 4 years in a woman's voice. She thought about it sometimes, and she let herself think about it, and then she let it be what it was. Not something to carry, but something to remember. Because that was the thing about people who did destructive things from a place of real pain. You could understand the pain and still name the destruction. Both things were true. Both things mattered. What you did with that understanding was the question. What Charlotte did was run the library. December brought the Story Hour Christmas program, which involved construction paper snowflakes and a picture book about a bear who couldn't sleep, and Marcus, who was now 4 3/4, and held himself to higher standards accordingly, reading his first full sentence aloud to the group and looking up afterward with an expression of pure, uncomplicated triumph that Charlotte thought about for the rest of the day. Damien came to the Story Hour, not announced, not with security. He arrived on a Saturday morning in December at 9:25, 5 minutes before the session began, wearing a coat that was less expensive looking than his usual coats, which she suspected was deliberate, and he sat down in the back of the reading room on one of the floor cushions the way she'd told him to, cross-legged, back against the wall, a grown man among picture books and stuffed animals, and he stayed for the whole session. She was reading the bear book. She saw him come in. She did not break the voice she was using for the bear, which was low and rumbling and made the children laugh every time. Afterward, when the children were getting their coats and parents were filtering in, he helped stack the cushions. He did it without being asked, without looking around to see if anyone was watching. He just picked up the cushions and stacked them the way she'd shown Adaeze, biggest on the bottom, staggered, and she watched him do it and felt something shift in her chest that was quiet and specific and real. She waited until the last child was gone. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said. "You told me to ask before I show up with cars," he said. "This seemed like a different category." "It is," she agreed. He looked around the reading room. The construction paper snowflakes that Adaeze had taped to the windows, the low shelves with their picture books arranged spine out so the covers faced the children at floor level, the corkboard with the frog drawing and the Story Hour schedule and the photograph of Marcus with his first independent read. "My mother worked in a library," he said. Charlotte looked at him. She had not known this. "Small town," he said. "Public library, 3 rooms, card catalog until the late 90s. She was there for 22 years. He looked at the corkboard. She used to bring me in on Saturday mornings. I'd sit behind the desk and she'd check books out, and when it was slow, she'd read to me. He paused. She died when I was 19, year after I got pulled into my father's business, before I understood it was a direction I could have chosen not to go. The reading room was very quiet. I'm sorry, Charlotte said. Not the automatic kind, the real kind. The foundation, he said. I started it because of her, because of exactly this. He gestured at the room, the minimal, book-scented, floor-cushion room. That was real. Whatever else it became attached to, whatever got tangled up with it, that part was real. Charlotte looked at him. At this man who had been built by a set of choices and inherited structures and a dead mother and 37 years of living in the particular weight of who he was, and who was standing in a children's reading room at 9:45 on a Saturday morning, having stacked the cushions in the right order, telling her about a card catalog. I know, she said. I knew that. He looked at her. Did you? Yes, she said. I wouldn't have signed the contract if I didn't. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the library's front windows, the December morning did its gray and cold thing. A child walked past on the sidewalk holding a red balloon. The restructuring, he said. It's going to take another year, maybe 18 months. Some of it is going to get complicated in ways that are going to be in the news. I assumed. I want you to know that anyway, in advance, so that when it gets complicated, you have that context. She looked at him. Why do I need that context? He looked back at her. Because I'd like you to not be surprised by it, he said. Because He stopped. I'd like it if there was someone who knew what was actually happening versus what it looked like. Charlotte put her hands in her cardigan pockets. That's a complicated thing to ask someone, she said. I know. It means staying in proximity to something that's been... She thought about the board meeting, the city liaison, the news van outside her library, the photograph of her face on screens she'd never asked to be on. It's been a costly couple of months. Yes, he said. It has. For me, she said, I want to make sure you understand that. The cost was mine, mostly. My reputation, my board, my library's status. You have resources I don't have. I know that too. And you're asking me anyway. I'm asking you anyway, he said. Charlotte looked at the corkboard. Marcus's frog, green crayon, enormous happy eyes, rain falling in blue lines. A 4-year-old's understanding of the story they'd read together. Not the complicated version, not the adult version with all its contingency and nuance, but the essential version, the frog in the rain. The rain is hard. The frog is okay. You'd have to actually ask, she said. Specific questions, in advance. Can I come to Story Hour Saturday is a complete sentence. Yes, he said. And if the answer is no on a given Saturday, you accept that without, yes. I'm not finished. He closed his mouth. And this library, she said, is not a place where your world comes in. Whatever happens outside, but the restructuring, the compliance board, the people who are not happy about changes, that does not come through that door. She pointed at the front door of the library. In here, there are children and books and floor cushions and a coffee maker that works 60% of the time. That's what's in here. He looked at the door. And if I come in here, he said, what am I? You're someone who stacks the cushions right, she said. That's all. Something in his face changed, not dramatically. It never did with him, she was learning. Small. The way a room feels different when more light comes in. Can I come to Story Hour next Saturday? He said. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. He nodded once. He picked up his coat from the chair where he'd set it when he came in. He put it on with the particular economy of someone who doesn't use unnecessary motion. At the door he stopped. He turned. Charlotte. Thank you for... He paused. For not leaving when it would have been completely reasonable to leave. She looked at him from across the reading room. I didn't stay for you, she said. It wasn't unkind.
It was just true. I stayed for the book. And the kids. He considered this. I know, he said. That's why it means something. He left. She stood in the reading room for a moment after the door closed. She looked at the display case visible through the reading room archway. The first edition, The Boy on the Dock, the lantern, the storm coming over the water, the illustration she had known since she was 8 years old. She went to the desk. She had returns to check in. The weeks after that moved differently, not without difficulty. There were still board check-ins, still occasional media attention when a new development in the regulatory story surfaced, still the periodic complicated feeling of being a person who had been briefly visible in a story she hadn't chosen to be part of. Those things didn't vanish. You didn't get a resolution that erased the complicated parts. What you got was time, and the return of ordinary rhythms, and the way ordinary rhythms eventually outweigh everything else, if you let them. Damien came to Story Hour on Saturdays. He called ahead. The answer was yes most Saturdays, and twice it was no. Once because she had a board prep session that ran over. Once because a family situation among 3 of her regular Story Hour kids required the kind of careful, gentle attention that wasn't compatible with having a man who'd been in the Chronicle sitting in the back of the room. And both times he said okay, and that was the end of it. He helped shelve books. He did it slowly and carefully, and initially in the wrong order, and she corrected him without ceremony, and he adjusted and did it correctly after that. He learned the Dewey Decimal System for children's picture books, which is not actually Dewey Decimal, but its own organizational logic, and he learned it without asking her to explain it twice. He had coffee with her sometimes between the library shelves, on the 2 folding chairs she kept near the biography section, because that was where the afternoon light came in best. They talked. Not about the restructuring, not usually, but about his mother and her childhood library and a book he'd read when he was 12 that had stayed with him, and what she was reading now, and the particular problem of explaining to a 4-year-old why the frog in one story had a different personality from the frog in a different story. He was not easy to know. He was not going to become easy. There were things in him that were not healed and were going to take a long time and might not fully resolve, because people are not problems with solutions. They are people. And the history he carried was real, and its consequences were real, and the restructuring was genuinely complicated in the ways he'd said it would be. And there were months where the news was bad in specific ways, and she could see it in him when he came in on Saturdays, the weight of it and how he held his shoulders. And she didn't always know what to do with that except not look away from it. That turned out to be enough, usually. In February, the Independent Trust formalized all 47 community partnerships with a public signing event that Damien attended as a private citizen rather than as foundation director, which was a distinction that the Chronicle covered in a follow-up piece that was considerably shorter than the original and ran on page 8. Charlotte did not attend the signing event. She sent a written statement confirming the Kenmore Branch Library's participation in the trust, and she went to work. And at Story Hour that Tuesday, Marcus read his second independent sentence aloud and then his third, and looked up with the same expression of uncomplicated triumph, which Charlotte suspected he would keep for a while because it was a very good expression, and he'd earned it. In March, on a Sunday, Damien asked Charlotte if she wanted to walk along Boston Harbor. He asked her on the phone, which she thought was appropriately formal for what he was actually asking. He said, "Sunday morning, Boston Harbor. Hot chocolate." He said there was a good place on the waterfront that he'd been told was worth it. He said he'd be walking, not arriving in a car, which she hadn't asked him to clarify but appreciated. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, with conditions." "Of course," he said. She listed them. They were small conditions, mundane, domestic, the conditions of a real morning rather than a performed one. He listened to all of them. She could hear him almost smiling. He agreed to every one. She showed up on Sunday in her regular coat, not Dana's emerald dress. He was already there when she arrived, standing at the harbor's edge, looking out at the water the way he stood at his 41st floor window, with the stillness of someone who had learned to be very quiet inside large things. She stood beside him. The harbor was gray and cold and moving in its steady, indifferent way. There was a container ship in the middle distance, gulls doing gull things above the water. He handed her a hot chocolate. Thank you, she said. Of course, he said. They stood there for a moment, looking at the harbor. I've been thinking, she said. About what? About Mrs. Olawale, she said, the librarian who gave me the book. I've been thinking about what she understood, about what it means to give someone a story at the right moment. He looked at the water. What did she understand, he said. That the story isn't the point, Charlotte said. Not exactly. The story is the door. What you do after you go through it is yours. She wrapped both hands around the hot chocolate. She didn't know what I would do with it. She just put it in my hands and trusted me. He was quiet for a moment. That's what you do, he said. With the kids. Yes, she said. He looked at her. I'm not there yet, he said. At the place where I can do something like that. Give something without the rest of it attached. I know, she said. But the direction is that way, he said. That's where I'm going. She looked at him. At the specific, complicated, imperfect man standing at a harbor in March with a hot chocolate, telling her the truth about where he was and where he was trying to get to. It wasn't a perfect thing. It wasn't a clean thing. There was no version of this that was without its history, its weight, its ongoing complications, and the real cost of the months behind them. But it was a true thing. And she had learned, over 30 years of living and 6 years of putting books in children's hands, that true things were rarer and more durable than perfect ones. Okay, she said. She started walking along the harbor, and after a half step he fell into pace beside her, and they walked in the direction of the good hot chocolate place. He'd been told was worth it, and the harbor did its gray and moving thing beside them, and the Sunday morning opened in the way Sunday mornings do, ordinary and specific, weather and water, and two people going somewhere one step at a time. The Kenmore Branch Library opened on Monday at 9. Charlotte was there at 7:58. She unlocked the door. She turned off the alarm. She started the coffee maker. She went to the display case and she stood in front of it for a moment. The first edition, The Boy on the Dock, The Lantern, The Storm Over the Water. And she thought about a woman named Mrs. Olawale who had pressed a book into the hands of an 8-year-old and trusted her with it, and about all the things that small act had set in motion, the long, complicated chain of it, all the way to here. She put her hand on the glass. Then she went to set up the reading corner and the morning began.